Okay. Can anybody hear me? You can just say yes, or you can give me a thumbs up like that. Okay, good. We got a minute or two here. Put your name in the chat if you're here. So I have a record. I'll be updating grades a lot this weekend, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so we're going to wait a minute or two. Again, make sure your name makes it in there. How many people do I have? 12. Yeah, it could be 4 more. Okay. All right. Oh, that's 9 o'clock right there. Okay, so let's immediately talk about the schedule. So I'm gonna see if I can get to it. Right there. Okay, so we should see the lecture topics and assigned readings. Does anybody see that? Yes, maybe. Thank you. Okay, so we finished exam 3. It should be graded sometime this weekend and it'll show up. We're working on the neurological exam, chapter 16, the last chapter among the chapters that we're going to work on. So we're working on that this week and a bit next week. Then there's some review and then the final exam. There's an asterisk next to November 16th, the last day to withdraw with a W is listed as yesterday. Actually, there's some leeway on that. If you feel you need to withdraw after the third exam grade is posted, which should be no later than Sunday night, then send me an email and I can still do that for you. Next week is a short week because we have Thanksgiving, so we won't have a Friday meeting next week. I will still post a little video for us to look at. There'll be a discussion forum for us to work on. I will post another video on the dissection of the sheep eye. And there'll be a lab quiz that will open up on the spinal cord and the assignment for your spinal cord photo and exercise 18 review. That'll all show up next week. None of it is due next week, but it'll show up. The last week, November 30th, that's the final week of classes. So I usually do a thing there where I'll reopen any chapter quizzes. And so that if there's a chapter quiz that you missed or didn't do as well as you've liked for one of the previous chapters, that's a good way to review it. So I will open it and you can work on that beginning on November 30th. And then that stuff will stay open for a while. Okay, and then the other thing I should talk about is the time for the final exam. I probably won't, I have to look at that again, but I won't make it the first day of finals. I'll probably make it a day or two in because I understand people have stuff to do. So it's listed as December 7th at 8 a.m. It'll be kind of like the other exams where it'll be open 2 days, 2 evenings. It'll open during the one day, be open that evening, and then close the next evening. So it'll be similar to the previous exams. Does anybody have any questions on the schedule? I should look at the chat. Can I see the chat? No, I can't see the chat. I have to get rid of the share to see the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. How big is the final? That's a good question. The final is slightly longer than the other exams. It'll contain some new material from chapters 15 and 16. And so it'll have some of that. It'll have an essay question or 2 on it, but it'll be slightly longer. And I think it's worth 150 points. So figure an extra 25 multiple questions. And it'll be open longer. So it'll be open 2 hours. Very good question. Anybody else? Yes, I will. And I will do the same type of review stuff, actually a little bit more. I'll have a practice final exam. I'll have the essay questions ahead of that. I will also have a big review where I'll have a PowerPoint where I pick out slides from the whole course and try and review the most important slides. Um, I'm not, when we have these final exams, I'm not going to go back and pick out new material that I've never asked you about before. I would try and go back and ask you about things that were identified as important before, and I think you should still remember. So it's kind of a good way to study is always to review old exams, review old quizzes, look at chapter summaries. Obviously, even if you start today, you could not read all the reading assignments that we've had for the course. This is not a book that's easy to read. So you have to kind of go back and look at it in different ways. Chapter summaries, identify what's important, look at all quizzes. And of course, this distributed review idea that you're going to do a little bit each day, this is kind of the time when you should be starting that, not just for my class, our class here, but for other classes where you think, okay, there's going to be a big final. And so distributed review means a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out of a big exam that you're already saying, okay, I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes on it a day, and I'm going to try and go over these parts. And that will really help you for the exam, and then you'll retain that stuff even longer. Okay, and let's see, there's other questions as well. So you have all the lab stuff that you need. And so we have you had the sheep brain, you have the cow spinal cord section, which to me, I kind of expected that to be much bigger. It was really kind of surprisingly small. And then you have the cow eye. That's it. And so the sheep brain stuff you should have already done. The assignment box is open. Submit your stuff in the assignment. Try and get that in there sooner rather than later. But I will probably be correcting a lot of that stuff over the Thanksgiving. So try and get that in there before then. We will have more. We won't have a Zoom meeting next week because that is the Friday after Thanksgiving. So next week we won't have one, but we'll have one the following week. And I may create another. I'll have to look at the schedule and see when I'm going to open the final. I might have a review during the finals week. So we'll see. If you're interested in a review during finals week, I'll ask you next week and you can give me a thumbs up. And so I'll give you an exact time next week. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Let's go and talk about the neurological exam. So let's go look at the PowerPoint, see if I can find that, and we'll talk about this. Okay. So the neurological exam. This is the last chapter on the nervous system, and it's about an applied assessment, which can really be done with very basic tools in a very short period of time to assess the functioning of the nervous system. And so this would be, I've had 2 run-ins with this, and not for me, but for someone I've known. And I'll explain that in a minute. Here's this picture here is from your textbook, and it shows an Army nurse doing a neurological exam. And you might do this in the Army if you thought someone had a concussion or if they had a traumatic brain injury. This would be something that's really important to do. It might be something you would do after a vehicle accident. And so those are times you might do that when you might suspect that there's neurological damage to the brain, spinal cord, or even some peripheral nerves. You might do this. And it can be done in a few minutes. It doesn't take a long time, 10, 15 minutes tops. And it requires a minimum of tools, just an understanding of how the central nervous and peripheral nervous system work together and what goes on in the different regions. Another time you might do this, particularly the first one, the mental status exam, is when you suspected dementia or an impaired mental function like that might occur after a stroke. So this would be something that you might do then. And it might be slightly altered, but that would be an important time to do it. For me, that was really important for my parents. My parents have both passed away in the last 5 years. My mom passed away last year. And for my dad, we did a mental status exam, and it was extremely helpful. My dad was showing signs of impaired memory, and it wasn't always immediately obvious. When you talked to him, he knew who you were. He had he could kind of think back and see what was going on. He was very similar personality-wise, and he could still do most of the things that he used to do. He could still play piano. He could still, he could still walk around the house and find things, and do tasks. He still read the newspaper. But there were signs that he had impaired memory. He was leaving coffee cups everywhere. He would leave a burner running on the stove and go do something else. And he was very forgetful. And so when I went to see him, it was pretty obvious to me that he was going to need pretty severe care, and that he could no longer function with just my mom in the house alone. And so I told my mom, you should come and move near me. And she went and asked my dad, can we move near Alan so that Alan can take care of us? And he said, no. They had a very traditional marriage in that my father worked and my mom took care of the kids. He made big financial decisions and things like that. And they generally would talk things over and usually agree, but he had the last word on things, and she was used to that. And so, I said, well, I think he's pretty impaired. I don't think you should listen to him. And she said, well, yeah, he's forgetful, but he's still pretty smart, and he's still, I still should listen. So finally we had a mental status exam with a nurse, and the nurse came in, and she started asking him these questions and going through these specific things to help her assess his memory, his judgment, and his emotional status. And my mom and I watched, and as they went through it, it became apparent to my mom how impaired he was. That by having him do simple memory tasks, he was really impaired. That he was having difficulty forming new memories at all, and that he was having trouble keeping two thoughts in his mind at the same time. He could not make judgments. And so it was helpful for her because she could realize, oh, he is severely impaired, and I can't rely on him to make decisions anymore. And so that was helpful for her. And so that was a time when a mental status exam was very, very helpful. He still was himself. He could still talk about things. He still had the same interests and same personality. He could read, play piano, but the memory impairments also related to judgment impairments, and that with specific questions that came out. And it also made it obvious he cannot take care of himself any longer. He can't make big decisions on money. He cannot make decisions on where to live or to assess things like something complex like help we need versus the inconvenience that it will cost to move. So I'm just going to talk about the mental status exam today, and because that's a really important one, and I think a lot of you, it's very important. The other part's cranial nerve exam. It examines the functions of all the cranial nerves, things like eye movements, sound, movements of the tongue, sensory things associated with the face, movements of the head. The sensory and motor exams examine the peripheral nerve and spinal pathways going to controls motor responses and sensory input. And then the coordination exam, or sometimes it's called the gait exam, it examines motor function and particularly the cerebellum. Okay, so let's see if I can get this going here. Okay, so mental status exam, that's really what we're going to talk about today. It's involving the domains of appearance, attitude, behavior, mood, and affect, which means emotion, speech, thought process, thought content, perception, cognition, insight, and judgment. Particularly orientation and memory, language and speech, judgment, and abstract reasoning. So like my father, he couldn't orient. He knew where he was. He was in his house, but he couldn't tell you what year it was, what month, or what day it was. He could not tell you who was president. If you asked him 10 minutes apart, he would give you different answers. It was a big deal. Language and speech is a really complex function. It involves the temporal lobe area called the general interpretive area, which interprets speech, and then the motor speech area, which controls the muscles of the tongue and the larynx. That's in the frontal lobe, and these have strong connections. And then language and speech kind of association areas are storing memories of words and associations with words. So it's really a complex function, often impaired. And then judgment and abstract reasoning, this is stuff that occurs in that executive function area in the frontal lobe and depends upon working memory. And so you got to have enough working memory that you can hold all these things in your mind at the same time so that you can make a judgment or abstract reasoning. If you've got 3 pieces of evidence and you can only hold one in your working memory, you'll make illogical judgments. And that was one of my dad's problems. Okay, so these are cortical areas that I just mentioned. Broca's area and Wernicke's area, those are the 2 speech areas. They're those little kind of solid circles. The prefrontal cortex contains a lot of that judgment and abstract reasoning areas. It also contains working memory. Long-term memory is in that temporal lobe, which is in that kind of portion that goes down and is pink. And then you have some kind of association areas and primary sensories and primary motor areas. And so we're going to assess a bunch of these things. All this stuff in the mental status exam is we can trace a specific region of the cerebral cortex where these functions occurs. Unfortunately, in the case of dementia, this is almost always some of the more important areas that are most likely to show problems. That's the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe areas. First, I want to say a little bit about memory. Okay, this is a good time to talk about memory, and I've talked about memory a lot because in college we're kind of relying on your memory. I have 2 pieces of artwork here, very different. One shows memory as solid, lasting, a guardian against loss, protecting everything else. So it's a woman with a sword and a helmet. The other is a Salvador Dali piece, the impermanence of memory. Clocks are fade over time, and so memory falls apart. So we have some very short-term types of memory, sensory and short-term memory that are limited. Sensory memory is kind of a sensory input. Short-term memory is an episodic memory, an explicit memory of numbers or words or an event, but it's brief, and it may be completely lost, as sensory memory can be lost. Okay, then we have long-term memory. Okay, and long-term memory is durable. It lasts for a long time, maybe your entire life. And when we have long-term memories, there's at least 2 types. Explicit memories, these are things you can put into words, retention of facts, names, dates, places, sequences of events, things like that. That's what we're working on in human anatomy and physiology. I'm trying to fill up your explicit memory with all sorts of stuff. Okay, then there's implicit memory. Um, Implicit memory is development of skills such as riding a bike, playing a piano, driving a stick shift car. Lots of skills like in nursing, like how to give a vaccination, how to turn a patient, how to how to do all sorts of very specific tasks. These are procedural memories. And these are often, the actual procedure itself is often learned in the cerebellum, and these actually turn out to be more durable. And with these, you may have trouble with a procedural memory. You may have trouble putting it into words, but once you start doing it, okay, yeah, then I remember. And so you get that. Okay. So memories can be converted into long-term memories. Um, we have these temporary memories, sensory and short-term, and if there's enough repetition, or if there's a linkage with an existing memory, an existing activity, an existing emotion, if there's some sort of linkage there, then repetition or linkage helps move these things into long-term memory. And so if you can, if something happens and you recognize, oh, this is similar to something that happened to my mother or to my sister, then you're likely to put it into your long-term memory, even though it happened only once. If something's repeated over and over, you're likely to put it in there. So the limu emu for the selling insurance on TV, they play the same stinking commercial and they have the same theme song, and you see it over and over again for years. And that's a strategy. They want to get it into your long-term memory. They don't care how obnoxious it is. They just want to repeat it. And so that's advertising. Okay. All right. So in memory and learning, we convert these temporary memories to long-term memories. And we know how this happens, and we know where it happens. This happens in the temporal lobe of the cerebrum. Okay, two structures in the temporal lobe, the amygdala and the hippocampus, are where this tends to happen. And so these are part of the cortex. And these structures, in people with good memories, these structures are large and they have a characteristic structure. And we know that this is going to happen. The memory will be stored elsewhere, but it's something goes on in the amygdala and hippocampus that is required for this to happen. And if those regions are damaged, it doesn't matter really what's going on in the rest of the cerebrum. You won't be able to form long-term explicit memories. You may still be able to form procedural memories, but not long-term explicit memories. So injuries to those areas are particularly severe. You can still form long-term procedural memories with damage with the hippocampus. However, you'll be unaware of that those things. And so, for instance, sometimes people that have had temporal lobe damage, they can enter therapy programs that will teach them physical skills. For instance, they may be taught skills like on a manual task, how to package items for mail. And so they get this training over and over. They do this packaging, and they're able to do this manual work. Okay, and they may be able to become quite proficient at this packaging, the sequence of putting things into these boxes and sealing boxes. However, they will not know that they know this. They'll need a brief refresher each morning that they go in, but then they'll be able to do this repetitive task over and over quite well, but they won't know they know it. Likewise, kind of knowing what we know about memory, there's several ways to improve memory, okay? One of the key things to improving memory is practicing things through repetition. Repetition moves short-term memories into long-term memories. Then also linking something we want to remember with a sensory input, with a motor activity, or with previous experience. Those things help move it into long-term memory. Also, emotions. Emotions play a really strong role because these structures, the amygdala and the hippocampus, are part of the limbic system, which I'm trying to show you here. The limbic system structures are involved in emotion, but they're also the key memory structures. Okay, you're likely to remember things that invoke strong emotions. Uh, Positive, happy events, your first ice cream, your first kiss, first time you drive a car, first time you ride a bike. Those things are likely, because they involve strong emotions, are likely to be remembered well. Also, kind of on the other hand, the negative impact of this is that things that provoke strong negative emotions are likely to be really remembered well and may interfere with memories if it's really traumatic. This is the cause of post-traumatic stress disorder. Things that threaten your life um, are imprinted on your memory, and this memory system kind of operates subconsciously. And if something happens, you may have what they call fear conditioning. That if that memory is really traumatic, you may have this association between like a certain smell and this really fear-causing event. And so even though that linkage might be kind of incorrect, whenever that smell or that sound comes, it puts you in this stress situation. And then once you've gone through this fear conditioning, these memory areas are so focused on those traumatic cues that it may interfere with the formation of new memories. You may have old memories come up at inappropriate times. And so this is the cause of post-traumatic stress disorder, is that this memory system is embedded in the limbic system. Okay, another really important thing is we know when short-term memories are moved into long-term memories. This is called memory consolidation, and this occurs during sleep, particularly during the sleep where you dream, and that's REM sleep. We know this because we've done experiments with it. We can interrupt REM sleep, and we can find out, oh yeah, that impairs memory formation. Okay, so lots of this mental status exam is looking at memory, asking people, who is president now, where are you, what are you doing, that orientation, that's partly memory. And then you ask them to repeat a series of numbers, a series of words, to see if they have this short-term memory and how that's working. Another thing is that you assess language and speech. This language and speech requires connection between Broca's area and Wernicke's area. It requires these areas to be functioning. You can have different types of speech disorders: aphasia, expressive aphasia, where you can't express yourself; receptive aphasia, where you can't understand speech. You can also have conduction issues, where you can do some of both, but occasionally not either. So you're kind of getting people to see how well they can speak, how well they can understand speech, and so that's a big part of it. Okay, then judgment and abstract reasoning. Once you've done these memory kind of type things, once you've done this language things, then you're going to ask them to do a few little bits of planning and decision making. This also lets you assess people's personality. Sometimes they'll have personality changes. They may have emotions that aren't so great. And again, this is prefrontal cortex. And so this is where lots of really important executive functions occur. This is where you are, is in that little red region in this guy's brain. And so that's really important. Okay. All right, so mental status exam, orientation and memory, language and speech, judgment and reasoning. And you're not only looking for them to answer questions, you're assessing their appearance and their behavior, their mood, how well they understand what's going on. Do they understand why you're there, why you're asking them the question? Those are important things. This is not to see if someone's a genius. It's to see if they still have most of the functions that you would require to function in everyday life. And so, it's important. It's done quickly, but it's important and can be very, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's about 30 minutes for today. Does anybody have any questions? Any more? Okay, so next week there will be new stuff appearing in the box, but we won't have a meeting on Friday because it's Thanksgiving. Um, we will have, when we get back, we will have our review materials for the final exam. So that last day of November, the first week of December, that's when we'll do our review. Those review things will show up, and we're going to have a final that's about 1/3 chapter 15 and 16, and about 2/3 review of the first 14 chapters. Okay, have a nice weekend. Uh, Work on your cow spinal cord and your sheep brain, and I'll see you the following week. Okay.